Okay, welcome back, everybody. This is the second Fitness Philosopher podcast. I am your host, Adam Fisher. Welcome back. I know I had some issues getting the first episode up online, but that's been taken care of now. It was an issue with my cover image not being able to be resized by my web host and all kinds of garbage like that. So, I've also been a little bit sick this week, so if I'm I don't quite sound my usual self, or if I'm coughing a lot, you know why that is. And I'm a total idiot because I was working out while I was sick and just making it worse. I got sick on Wednesday, and then come Sunday I was thinking, okay, I'm fine. I can, go work out. And I went for a 45-minute run, and I came back with such a splitting headache that it lasted all day Monday and part of the way into Tuesday. So, the moral of this story is that you should never listen to me when it comes to stuff like your health or, like sickness or, disease, because obviously those are not my specialties. Anyway, so this week I decided I would start with my liberal BS early, offend as many people as early on as possible, just to alienate any of the people in the fitness industry who think I'm, worth listening to. So that's great. Our topic this week is going to be the wage gap. So, the wage gap, what is it? What does it mean? How should we talk about it? What does this mean for feminism, etc.? So I think that the number one problem that I have with the wage gap is how often it's sort of misinterpreted and misused and thrown around a lot, and just sort of generally people, and I'm not going to say that, it's people not knowing statistics, because no one really knows statistics, just how, a lot of people who are not scientists don't know science, and even a lot of scientists don't really understand science properly. Only good scientists do, and that's why it's so hard to get good science done. But the wage gap is a very interesting statistic that says a lot about how people don't really understand statistics and what they mean and how we can use them. So what the wage gap is we have a universally recognized thing where women working full-time don't make as much as men working full-time. And that in the U.S. is to the tune of about 77 or 78%, I think, currently. It's been different in the past. Obviously, it's been decreasing. And it exists not just in the U.S. It exists all over the world. We're not the only ones. We're not unique in this. And so that's a huge topic for feminism, obviously, because it means that women are making less money than men. And over a whole lifetime, that can be a huge difference. Now, the problem is how people just sort of take that 77 or 78 or 75. I think a lot of people are around a 75 for convenience. They take that figure and they just sort of run with it, and they say, oh, well, obviously women make 3/4 of what men do, so that's a problem, we need to fix it, without really looking any deeper at the statistics and what they mean and, potential sources for that issue and stuff like that. So I think that it's a really unproductive thing to do, because a lot of maybe less educated feminists or, people who don't necessarily have their shit in order kind of run with that, and they just, that's it. And, for example, I get a lot of things where, for example, I saw a friend online shared a link to a video from an economist called Thomas Sowell, who, I can't remember when this video was filmed, probably in the 70s or the 80s. But basically, his argument against it was that if you control for, various factors, what ends up happening is that wage gap almost virtually disappears. And that's very true, because first of all, that statistic only focuses on full-time workers. So what that means is we could have a lot of women working multiple, part-time jobs, or, just working a part-time job, and they could be making a similar amount or, more, whatever, as men, just that's not really included in the statistics, so that throws that off a little bit. And another thing is that, again, as you control for different factors, a lot of that wage gap disappears to the tune of it becomes about 95% to every U.S. or to every male dollar. So it becomes as small as 5% instead of 25%. That's a huge difference. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't still exist. We know that it exists. We have studies that show that it exists. And the fact that it exists is the problem, not, the exact numbers. It's kind of silly to quibble about numbers when, we have this underlying structural issue. Now, of course, it makes it a lot less pithy. It's, a lot harder for us to just run with a 75% figure, as opposed to a 95% figure. But, that's just sort of the way things are. People like to be sensationalists. They like to throw around big numbers. They like to, they like to try and make things where they can. So, for example, this guy shares this Thomas Sowell video saying, oh, yeah, like, here's proof that the wage gap doesn't exist. And it says, well, no, it doesn't. Because in real life, we don't have these controls. He was saying, basically, if you look at the fact that, single women often have children that they have to take care of, or, they may be married or may not be married, stuff like that. When you factor all that stuff in and you look at single men and single women who have never been married and never had kids, their numbers look pretty much the same. Now, of course, the disparity arises when you take into the account, men who have been married or men who have kids who don't suffer nearly as much as women do. Women who have kids tend to plateau in their income afterwards as a result. And that's a huge issue. I think that's probably the main issue here, but we're going to get more into that later. So, like I said, controlling for variables tends to cause a large percentage of the wage gap to disappear. What are some of those variables? One of those is that women may work less hours than men. Obviously, if women are raising kids, that's a huge amount of unpaid labor they have to do in their off time, and they don't have time to work, full time, or they may not have time to, be job seeking or, career climbing, ladder climbing type, people as a result. It may mean that women prefer part-time jobs for whatever reason. It may mean that women simply work in different job sectors. Women... There tend to be sort of gendered expectations on men and women in certain sectors. Men tend to get these more dangerous, high-powered jobs, whereas women tend to get safer stuff like desk work and, nursing is a big one and, stuff like that. I knew a guy actually in high school, and I briefly had a discussion with him about how he was kind of going into nursing, and he felt that he was discriminated against because, people didn't really believe that men could or should be nurses. And then we also have stuff like women tending not to be considered for higher power jobs. We have this obvious fact that the glass ceiling exists as well. We have, maybe I think 20 female senators out of 100 right now. We don't have a lot of female CEOs of companies. We don't have a lot of women in huge decision-making jobs like that. And, again, you could argue that that's just the way women are made, but that's very disingenuous because obviously there are plenty of women who would love to have a job like that. The question is why it's not happening. And another misconception that I want to talk about is how people tend to think that flat 75%, means something like, oh, well, if it's real, then I can just pay women 3/4 of what I pay men and doing the exact same job, and they're cool with that. No, that's not what that means at all. What it means is that, men tend to get promoted to higher paying jobs that make more than, women in lower paying jobs. What that does not mean is that they are paying women different amounts in the same jobs. If I went into, say, Arby's, because I worked at an Arby's as a kid. I worked at an Arby's for, $8.50 an hour or whatever I worked for. $8, $8.50, I can't remember. But if I had walked into that Arby's and there had been, women in that same job working the exact same work that I was doing, and we had tried to pay them 75% of that, do you think that would work? No, of course not. Partly because A, it would probably be, that would probably violate, minimum wage laws. But B, word would get out. Women would hear about that. They would realize that they were being paid less, and they would get pissed off, and then they would quit. That's that's just not how it works. what we're not talking about is, women being paid less for the same jobs. We know that they're not paid less for the same jobs. They're being paid the same for the same jobs. They're just not getting promoted to higher level jobs that would end up paying more, for whatever reason. Another thing is, I had a friend on Facebook share a thing a really long time back that was talking about how, someone opened up a shop that charged women 75 cents on the dollar for products that they charged men for. I think that's also just a stupid, blatant misuse of the statistics, and just again, sort of ignoring what is really going on here. It's not a solution. Certainly, it's just kind of a stupid way to make sort of a statement, without really changing anything. And yeah, it doesn't solve the problem. It doesn't attempt to fix any issues with gender equality. It just sort of slaps some numbers on top of things and says, okay, we're good now. And that's not what we should be looking for here. We should really be looking for men and women to be valued equally across the job spectrum, across the wage spectrum. That is sort of the ideal here. That's the goal. That's what we're looking for. And again, the wage gap is much smaller when you control for the situations that women may exist in. When you compare very similar populations or cohorts of men and women. But again, we do demonstrably notice that there is a difference, even if it's just 5%. Even if women make 95% on the dollar to what men make, that's still a huge difference. That still matters. That's still not, like a statistical anomaly. That's not something that we throw away. It's not like this is a 0.5% here or there. This is still 5% is still a huge number over, the lifetime of, a single person. And it's important to understand that, again, I've probably mentioned this already, but controls don't exist in real life. Just because you can take similar cohorts or populations of men and women and compare them and notice that they make the same money doesn't mean that, these situations aren't necessarily easy to reach in real life. Again, if you take a woman who's never been married and a man who's never been married, well, it's a lot harder for women to be in that position, considering that we know that there's so much pressure on women to get married, to marry rich, to find a nice guy, stuff like that. And I know personally, one of my professors in college talked about how when she wasn't really interested in marrying, they sort of said like, oh, well, she's a career woman. And they said it in a very pejorative sort of way, like, oh, yeah, well, at least you got your job. That's cool. Which again sort of speaks to the way society views, women and the way they sort of expect them to fill certain roles. And so, yeah, I think that what we're really speaking about here is more sort of these unquestioned gender role assertions that sort of put women in certain jobs and put men in other jobs. And it has nothing to do with, it may have to do with discrimination. It may have to do with, simply, shitty kind of employment policies. But I think it's more likely that it has to do sort of with these sort of unquestioned assertions about, who should be doing what. Is the wage gap improving? Yes, that's also a demonstrable factor. The wage gap has been improving steadily. It's been getting smaller and smaller and smaller. But as my friend Elizabeth Sampot pointed out, it's getting smaller for white women. It's not changing as much for women of color. And the interesting thing, too, is that she has a very good article where she cites a lot of statistics and point out that now, the raw wage gap figure, instead of being closer to 75% for white women, is closer to more like 80 or 85%. And that it's much, much, much worse for women of color. Which suggests that what's happening is that we are trying to fix, and I put that in, scare quotes, we are trying to fix the wage gap by hiring a lot of white women. And that's, not necessarily the solution that we're looking for. That's an issue with intersectionality right there. And that says that, that the race, that obviously says that racism is still a thing, maybe not says definitively, but it points in the right direction, certainly. And it points out that we may have issues with sort of how we look at the wage gap and how we look at, how to fix it. Because just hiring white women, isn't the goal. Again, we're trying to be equality for everyone across, the wage, across, wages, across industries, across genders, across, races, across everything. We want everyone to have, sort of an equal opportunity, at least, as close as possible with some small variances. So yeah, it's just a question of, should we really just sort of throw these numbers around? And I would say absolutely not. I think that it's a really complex topic, and I think that providing really simple, like one-note answers for it is obviously not going to work, because it's just such a complex topic. It's huge, like this is really pervasive. It's really structural, and we couldn't really provide any definitive answers onto what is happening and, where exactly it's happening. But one thing I will say that I've noticed, and that, again, I'm not necessarily calling anyone out on this, but in kind of going along the lines of, problems with intersectionality, we have this thing where I think this tends to be a much bigger issue for, white women, white feminism, than for, more intersectional feminism, which is to say that it's kind of more of the focus for white feminists. Is that a bad thing? I mean, no, not necessarily. But again, kind of going along with the statistics about how things are improving for white women, but not necessarily for women of color, that should be an issue that we should think about. It might say that, if you're, and this is another quote from Elizabeth Sampat, she had a tweet a long time back that said something along the lines of, if your version of feminism is just an uncritical examination of the wage gap, then you have intersectionality issues. And I tend to agree with that. I think that, we should just be looking at the wage gap. Like, that's one small factor in this huge thing. On top of which it's, sort of implicitly capitalist. And not to say that capitalism is a bad thing. I'm pro-capitalist. But, certainly there are definite strains of feminism that are, intersectional with Marxism, socialism, etc. And, they probably don't care about the wage gap, or shouldn't. But it's weird that this is such a big issue, that this is one of the biggest issues that feminism tackles, because, again, it is so, like, implicitly capitalist. So, kind of to tie this out, going into what I think the real issue is with discrimination, I think that, and again, this is just sort of my guess, this isn't something that I've studied or researched, this isn't something that, this is sort of off the top of my head, and it's, maybe a somewhat more educated opinion than, some people's opinions, but it's certainly not the best in the world. And I would love to see any evidence to the contrary. I'd love to see anyone, give me any sort of arguments about this. I think that probably the biggest contributor to the wage gap is the way women are generally forced to disproportionately bear, sort of the economic hardship of pregnancy. And I think that, first of all, I'm going to have people knocking down my door saying, oh, well, we have alimony payments. We have the fact that, men, might lobby to get their kids, but women, more often do get kids, in custody battles and stuff like that. And I think that those are, yes, that's options as well. We should have situations in which, men and women equally are allowed to, really debate on equal footing about, who gets to really raise the kids. And I think that we have this sort of stereotype in society that, women are the better caregivers and that women should be raising kids. And I think that may be true historically, but I think that that's changing. And I think also that, as, we sort of break down the traditional super asshole-ish, male stereotype, I think that we should, like open up the opportunity for men to be real caregivers for kids. And that should be a huge thing. But I think that, currently and historically, women are still generally forced to bear children. Women are forced through, sort of like these anti-abortion practices to bear children that they don't want to, and then they're forced to raise them. And, there may not be, a supportive male figure to, to pay for it, to pay alimony. There may not be, someone watching over them, and they may have to then raise kids, mostly on their own. And that's a huge deal. Because not only is that a huge amount of labor that goes essentially, just uncompensated, but again, you then don't have time to do a full-time job. You don't have time to do other stuff. And even when you take into account, say, female professionals, they might have to quit a job to, to raise kids, because we don't really have anything in the way of, paid maternity leave here in the U.S. We have very little. There's not really any major requirement. It's not really required by law, which is huge, because in other parts of the developed world, they've got, very generous, paid maternity leave packages, required by law. And I think that that's a good thing. I think also that, it's been pointed out that the whole thing where women's earning potential plateaus after they have kids is actually true also even in the Nordic countries, where they have very generous paid vacation leave. So I don't think that that alone is a solution, certainly. Simply because, when they have these very generous paid vacation leaves, they, might, just kind of take advantage of that, and then they don't get as much job experience, and then that sort of stunts their growth later on. So I don't think that paid vacation leave certainly is a sole solution. I'm not saying that. But I do think that that is one step in the right direction, because, it turns like being forced to quit an important job and essentially start your career all over into, being forced to take a break from the job, losing a bit of experience, certainly losing a bit of, potential income later on, but, not nearly as devastatingly and not without, certainly the hardship of being forced to, maybe go unemployed for a while and not have any clue where, your income is coming from. So it's, I think that pregnancy is the biggest thing. I really do. And I think that when you think about the fact that, even in, couples where, like, loving man and wife or, whatever, committed partners, don't, again, men are expected to sort of keep working and women are expected to raise the kids. And I think that that is a huge thing. Again, I think that, men are very rarely forced to bear any real hardship from kids or, really consider it an issue. And then, women are. And that goes into hiring practices too. I feel like it's a very real possibility that, people in positions of power for hiring would choose not to hire women because they're afraid that they, might get pregnant and take off. Again, that's sort of a really shitty thing to do, but I think it's a very real possibility that some people do that. I think it's possible that, like when people are hiring women, they may say, oh, well, she's got kids, so she doesn't have time to really dedicate her full life to this position. Stuff like that. It's again, a very sort of backwards view of things, but it's, it's, I think, a very real view that really does limit the way, the way like women get into higher positions. And I don't really like the term glass ceiling. I think that the whole glass ceiling thing is, it's a very soft ceiling, obviously. It's not like a hard barrier, but it's real, it's a thing. And again, I'd like to refer to the point that we don't have women in positions of power. We've for the first time in history, we are maybe having the possibility. Again, maybe having the possibility. It's not even in any way, set yet. We are maybe having the possibility of a female president. Like, yeah, great job, awesome. We've had one shot at a female presidency in the however many years that this country has been around. So it's it's obvious that we have some kind of issue with women getting into, positions of authority and power. And again, that may be, I think it's in large part because of presidency. I think it's in large part because of sort of, societal expectations and gender roles. But it's certainly, again, not a hard ceiling because we do have women, we do have at the very least, 20 or so senators who are female, even if that's a severe underrepresentation. It's changing. It certainly is. And it has been getting better. I'm not denying that either. And I also agree that I think that the wage gap is a lot smaller than a lot of people think. But I would say that I don't think that means that, we should forget about it, or that, it's not real, or that, it's just something liberals make up to fuck with the conservatives. No, it's a thing. We know it's a thing. We have statistics. But, again, it's more about how we use those statistics and what they mean than anything else. And I think that in general, we are very statistically illiterate as, a people. And I think that's probably always going to be the case. That's not something that, is going to go away. We can't expect everyone to be an expert when it comes to understanding and reading and interpreting and applying statistics. That's silly. That's absolutely crazy. It's like expecting everyone to know rocket science. Not to say that it's on the same level, but, it's a very specialized skill that people train for. That's how they become statisticians, So that's kind of really all that I had to say today on the topic of the wage gap. I don't really have any sort of blanket statements on what, what we should do about it. I think that, as always, the general policy of, try not to be an asshole, try to be intersectional, try to understand other people's stories, try to listen to them and believe them when they tell you their experiences. Try and keep your ears open, try and keep your mind open, try not to simply, talk over people and try and assert your own worldview, because that's how it happened to me. So that's how it had to happen for everyone. I think that in general, the wage gap is improving, and that may mean that we don't need to do anything different than what we've already been doing. That may mean that, so long as, we sort of keep up the good fight, and so long as feminism continues to exist, that, we'll see this equalizing out of, wage opportunities. But it certainly exists. It's not a fairy tale. It's not fake. It is a real thing. So that's really all that I had to say for this week. And yeah, let's hope that I didn't piss anyone off too much this week, and I hope to see you all again next week. Signing out, Adam Fisher, the Fitness Philosopher. Have a good one.